From Recorded Future News and PRX, this is Click Here. Across the United States, millions of people still can't get reliable internet at home. Sometimes it's the price. Sometimes it's just that there's no network to connect to at all. And that might sound like a modern problem, but it isn't. A century ago, the same divide shaped who got electricity and who didn't. Then it showed up again in telephone lines. Huge swaths of the country simply left out, until the government stepped in and decided access wasn't optional. It was infrastructure. Now, some experts say the internet belongs in that same category. But for people living with slow speeds, dropped connections, or nothing at all, that argument doesn't fix the problem. And hoping that Washington will catch up isn't much of a plan. So, many aren't waiting. They're building the networks themselves.
They have a desire for sovereignty because there are so many towns and cities where the big providers don't want to serve, or if they want to serve, they want to give them very low quality.
From Recorded Future News and PRX, this is Click Here, a podcast about the people making and breaking our digital world. I'm Dina Temple-Raston. This week, Zach Hirsch has a story about a community in Southern California that is rethinking something pretty fundamental: what it means to be connected.
I think that was a huge eye-opening moment for this whole group of people, like watching the individuals in this community change their own destiny.
That's after the break. Stay with us.
From Recorded Future News and PRX, this is Click Here. I'm Zach Hirsch. Back in the late 90s, Matthew Rantanen was in Silicon Valley.
So I'm a recovering graphic designer. I got into a .com company, BlueMountain.com, and I was at a management level, a senior designer and manager.
This was peak.com, when investors believed the internet would reinvent everything.
OnMoney.com.
Snap.com. Right answers right away.
EBWorld.com. We're inside your world.
Remember those cutesy animated GIFs people would send each other?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Matthew made those for a living.
Also responsible for setting up web servers and doing all kinds of different stuff. So I got way into the technology side of things.
And then, in March of 2000, the .com bubble burst.
I got laid off like everybody else in the .com, and I got...
When the .com dream collapsed, Matthew found himself looking for work and purpose. He's a descendant of the Cree Nation, and around that same time, tribes in Southern California were trying to solve this problem that the tech boom had largely ignored: how to get connected at all. So when those tribes began looking for technical help, Matthew raised his hand. This didn't feel like just another contract. This felt personal. The tribes wanted to improve their internet service and build a web portal, and they hired Matthew to help out. And it didn't take long to understand the scale of the challenge. For one thing, a few people had dial-up, but otherwise...
there was no access. I couldn't use my cell phone on the reservation.
There were actually 19 reservations spread across Riverside and San Diego counties, rural communities separated by distance, and by infrastructure that had never been built.
They're at the base of a mountain, or there's a lot of rocks in the ground, so trenching fiber doesn't work very well. There's a lot of wildfire, so, hanging fiber on poles doesn't work very well.
But the tough terrain wasn't just some unlucky coincidence. It was history, a legacy of forced relocation, broken promises, and chronic neglect.
The tribes didn't choose to live on the reservations that they currently live on. They were put there. They were moved to an area that didn't have any resources. And the federal government, they were supposed to provide these resources to these reservations.
Resources like phone lines and later internet. And that promise goes back generations. And when it came time for broadband, big providers looked at the map and made the same calculation we talked about earlier. Small populations, hard builds, uncertain profit. Add to that the fact that each tribe is considered a sovereign nation with its own laws, permitting processes, and negotiations. To providers, it often didn't seem worth the trouble. So instead of building directly, the government tried to nudge the market. It offered subsidies, which came with strings attached. Like if a company accepted the funding, it had to commit to serving almost everyone in the area, at least 98.5% of customers.
Guess who the 1.5% is? Like the 1.5% that you worked your way around, it includes all the tribes.
For Matthew and the tribes in San Diego County, that gap wasn't abstract. It meant unreliable phone service, slow connections, or no connection at all, which is why they started looking for another way. And just as they were getting started, they heard about a project happening nearby called HP-REN,
which is High Performance Wireless Research and Education Network.
It wasn't built to bring internet to people. It was built to study earthquakes. Out in the desert, a researcher had figured out how to send seismic data wirelessly to a university lab more than 50 miles away. Matthew and his team saw it and thought, if you can send earthquake data that far, maybe you can send internet too. So they tracked down the scientist behind it, and it turned out he wasn't just any researcher. He was one of the pioneers of the early internet, Hans Werner Braun. He invited them into his kitchen and gave them a crash course in networking.
And explained, here's 2 wireless radios. This is how they communicate. Now go build this on mountaintops. And no kidding, that was like the level of instruction, and it was done in his kitchen.
And that was basically the plan. Build towers, put radios on mountaintops, bounce the signal across the desert. And just like that, the tribes started building their own internet.
Microwave radios that point from one tower to the next and sending and receiving data through the airwaves.
For this to work, the towers had to be able to see each other, line of sight. If one mountain couldn't see the next, the signal wouldn't make it. So while Matthew worked on grants and funding, teenagers grabbed hiking boots, GPS units, and notebooks and headed into the hills. They climbed ridgelines and mountaintops, looking for places where one tower could see another.
From the top of this mountain that the Paula tribe owns, you can see Santa Isabel, and you can see La Jolla, and you can see Mesa Grande. So this is a really good spot to put a tower because we can see all 3 of those locations. And they documented all the places that they thought would be the best place to put a tower.
Within a year, by 2002, the towers started going up.
It's like the hub of a bicycle wheel, and the spokes that go out are wireless connections.
7 reservations connected, and the network was live. They called it the Tribal Digital Village Network, TDVNet. For the first time, these communities had reliable internet. Not everyone welcomed the idea. Matthew ran into pushback from some tribal leaders. They were worried about disturbing artifacts in the ground and wary of what the internet might bring.
It's full of bad things, and we don't want our kids to be exposed to that.
And there was another concern, security. Because other tribes went online, and before long, hackers targeted them. Earlier this year, the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes in Oklahoma were hit by a ransomware attack. It shut down their systems, and hackers demanded hundreds of thousands of dollars just to unlock them again.
Virus things that have happened to some of the tribes where all of their records and things have been stolen and held for ransom. Multiple tribes have been caught in that.
Stories like that made some tribal leaders cautious. But in San Diego County, Matthew says they moved carefully, emphasizing security and training from the start. And as the towers went up, something unexpected happened. The internet didn't just change the network, it started changing the community, especially among young people.
Kids that didn't really have any drive and were trapped on a reservation, didn't really have an out or, vision to something else. The internet had given them access to like online video editing tools, and they were now editing their skateboarding videos and like doing little short videos of them doing tricks on skateboards and doing different stuff with their friends, or, rapping, all kinds of stuff like that.
These kids weren't just gaining access to the internet. In many cases, they had helped build the network themselves. And after decades of neglect, limited resources, and being told it couldn't be done, the tribal digital village proved it could.
That was a huge eye-opening moment for this whole group of people. Like, hey, all that stuff we just did turned into, we have internet after school in these programs, and now we can do stuff. They could take the reins on this and didn't have to rely on, some carrier who was going to charge them, full retail to do any of these things, and probably not even come because there's, no return on investment in these reservations. So that was sort of the eye-opening moment, was watching the individuals in this community change their own destiny.
When we come back, the tribal digital village starts drawing attention far beyond Southern California. And Matthew steps into a new role, not just building networks, but teaching others how to do it too. Stay with us.
It is called Internet.
I use the World Wide Web information superhighway.
Cybersecurity. Why do things go viral?
Click here.
As the network expanded, tower by tower, word began to spread. Other reservations wanted to know how they had done it. And Matthew began to realize this wasn't just a local solution. It might be a blueprint. There are more than 300 federally recognized reservations in the United States, many facing the same broadband gaps. So Matthew started talking about the tribal digital village at conferences, at workshops, at the Federal Communications Commission. And soon, TDVNet started attracting attention far beyond California.
We got written up in a French magazine about this. They figured out that we might be the largest wireless network that was not for profit in the world at the time. We're like, what?
But Matthew wasn't interested in press coverage. What he wanted was for other communities to be able to do this too. So he started inviting tribes to Southern California to learn how to build the internet themselves.
There's one yellow. Okay, there's a second pair. We found two.
Matthew organized his first workshop for tribes in 2021. At the time, the federal government had set aside billions of dollars for tribal broadband projects. But many communities didn't know how to access that funding or how to turn the money into functioning networks. So the workshop filled up quickly.
I think we had 29 people, 7 tribes represented. It was 103 degrees, and we were holding it in a big metal shop.
Matthew worried the extreme heat would clear the room. Instead, he saw something very different. Some participants were crying.
Tears of happiness. And, I'm not doing this alone. I had no clue we were doing this in our community. We didn't know other people were doing this. We now have friends and resources in the space. And by day 3, everybody was still in the room, still engaged, still focused, and still doing the work.
They called it the Tribal Broadband Boot Camp. And the goal was simple and ambitious. Teach tribes how to build and operate their own internet systems end to end, from towers to fiber to repair. And to make the training practical, Matthew transformed his property into a hands-on lab.
Fiber in the ground, there's tower sections, there's aerial lashing demos on poles and stuff. I mean, it got the space, so might as well play with it.
Participants didn't just sit through presentations. They practiced real-world scenarios, including what happens when something goes wrong. Matthew would deliberately damage a fiber line, then challenge teams to repair it. The work was technical, but the impact was human. People who had never collaborated before began working side by side, even tribes with long-standing tensions.
And all of those technicians hung out together and became this one unit. They took a picture of themselves holding a metal mast with a wireless antenna on top of it, as if they were reenacting the Iwo Jima photo.
You know the one. Soldiers leaning in to raise a flag.
And they started exchanging resources and working with each other and supporting each other's efforts. Never been done. So that was amazing.
Of course, it wasn't just photo ops. Tribes were taking what they learned and then applying for grants and launching their own internet companies, fully owned and operated by the tribes, just like the Tribal Digital Village.
They have a desire for sovereignty. They want to own those networks. They want to own the airwaves over their tribal communities as well.
That's Gigi Sohn with the American Association for Public Broadband. She says what Matthew helped spark is part of a broader shift. Communities, tired of waiting, are building networks of their own.
There are so many towns and cities where the big providers don't want to serve, or if they want to serve, they want to give them very low quality.
Gigi is helping towns and cities create their own internet providers, and that can take a lot of different forms. Co-ops, open access networks, public utilities, like in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
So an old coal city, really down in the dumps in the 80s and 90s, they had an electric utility. And the leaders of the time said, well, why don't we just add broadband? And now this city has exploded. It has become, one of the highest tech cities of the South.
Chattanooga was the trailblazer, and later other cities followed. Places like Wilmar, Minnesota, Huntsville, Alabama, Pharr, Texas, and Bountiful, Utah, which partnered with an internet company called Utopia.
And Bountiful owns the infrastructure, but Utopia runs it. So there are lots of different ways. If you don't want to run it, there are companies that will run it for you, but the public owns the infrastructure and can decide who gets it, at what price, and can ultimately benefit from it in terms of economic development and revenues.
Gigi says this isn't about some abstract idea of sticking it to the man. It's about power, even justice. Because if you own your own internet, you control your future. Right now, over 800 cities and towns across the US have some sort of public broadband. And Gigi says the big internet companies are not thrilled.
The big ISPs have a very comfortable situation. They each have regional monopolies, and they make a lot of money from them. They can charge, monopoly prices, and they don't want anybody treading on that.
We reached out to two major internet companies, Charter and Comcast. We haven't heard back. But their lobbying groups have argued that the private sector does internet the best, that public projects are too expensive and government should stay out of the way. Gigi hears hypocrisy in that argument because private companies are usually the biggest winners of government funding.
The notion that there's just private enterprise that doesn't use public rights of way, that doesn't take taxpayer dollars, it's just a bunch of nonsense.
Back in Southern California, Matthew says resistance isn't always out in the open. Sometimes it's quiet. Matthew believes some large providers are waiting for tribal networks to fail, hoping to buy them at a bargain price later.
They feel like, tribe's going to use all their federal program to build the network. And then these companies are going to come in and buy them for nothing and, make money on it. And they won't have spent a dime doing it.
Matthew says that's exactly what the bootcamp network is designed to prevent. If one community struggles, others step in with advice, resources, or technical help.
And if they are in the bootcamp network of folks, these are conversations that are happening regularly. Can somebody help us, devise a solution around this?
So far, he says more than 200 tribes have begun forming their own internet service providers. Funding setbacks have slowed some projects, but the momentum remains. Because for decades, these communities waited for the market to find them profitable, for the government to fulfill old promises. Now, many have concluded that neither is coming, so they're building the infrastructure themselves. Not just wires and towers, but independence. Proof that the tools of connection don't have to belong only to large corporations, that local knowledge can solve problems outsiders deemed impossible, and that the communities most often left out can become builders, not just customers.
That was Zach Hirsch, and this is Click Here. We'll be back on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Click Here is a production of Recorded Future News and PRX. Today's show was written and produced by Megan Dietrich, Sean Powers, Erica Gaida, Zach Hirsch, and Casey Georgie. It was edited by Karen Duffin and Sarah Cavedo, and fact-checked by Darren Ankrum. Original music is by Ben Livingston, and additional music is from Blue Dot Sessions. Our staff writer is Lucas Riley, our illustrator is Megan Goff, and our sound designers and engineers are Jake Cook and Jesse Neiswanger. I'm Dina Temple-Raston, and that's the show. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for another look at how tech is reshaping our world.